Welcome to NJ Crime Talk, Episode 2, $25,000 Unclaimed. As many of you may know, here at NJ Crime Talk we stay as tuned in as possible to what's going on in the Garden State. On today's episode, we will be exploring a series of murders that took place between the months of October and November in 2006. Since we will be discussing a serious crime of graphic nature, viewer discretion is advised. On November 20th, 2006, 4 dead bodies of women identified as sex workers were found in a drainage ditch filled with shallow water behind the Golden Key Motel on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township, situated on the outskirts of Atlantic City, New Jersey. All 4 women's bodies were found in the same position, face down, facing east, with 60 feet in between each body. Strangely, each body was completely clothed, except for their feet, where the shoes and socks were removed. Barbara V. Brader, 42, worked as a sex worker and reportedly struggled with cocaine addiction. She disappeared in October 2006, but was not reported missing for several weeks. Her body was so badly decomposed that the cause of death could not be determined, and she had to be identified through dental records. Molly Jean Diltz, 20, originally from Blacklick, Pennsylvania, was last seen alive a few days before her disappearance. She was the only victim not to have a record of sex work, although she was believed to be working as a sex worker. She was believed to have been the first to be killed, and her body was so badly decomposed, the cause of death could not be determined. Tracy Ann Roberts, 23, a former erotic dancer and originally from a small town in Delaware, was also a sex worker in Atlantic City and struggled with drug addiction. She was last seen alive in November 2006 when she was hit in the throat and hospitalized by a man who wished to be her pimp. Her cause of death was determined as asphyxiation. Kim Raffo, 35, a former waitress originally from Carnegie, Brooklyn, was a wife and a mother who was involved with sex work in Atlantic City. She was last seen alive a day before the bodies were discovered. She was believed to be the last of the 4 victims to be killed and was strangled with a rope or cord. Early in the investigation, a Salem County man was implicated by his girlfriend. That man was Terry Uleson, a 41-year-old repairman. Uleson was staying for free at the Golden Key Motel in exchange for repairs when the murders took place. Investigators questioned Uleson extensively after the bodies were found on November 20th, 2006, based on a number of troubling leads. As mentioned, he had been staying in the Golden Key Motel in Egg Harbor Township just before the bodies were discovered behind it. After 7 hours of routine questioning, Uleson has stated the tone abruptly changed. He says one of the investigators told him, quote, "We know you did it," end quote. "I thought, man, you guys are really friggin' stupid," Uleson said. It didn't help Uleson that an acknowledged prostitute told police and any reporter who would listen that Uleson confessed to her that he had killed several women. Losing any and all credibility, however, when she later recanted her statements at a news conference and apologized to him. In quite the turn of events, Uleson would be arrested 4 days after the questioning and later be charged, although for an entirely different crime. While ransacking his Alloway Township home for evidence, authorities discovered a network of hidden cameras. He eventually admitted to using them to secretly record his then-girlfriend's 15-year-old daughter in various states of undress. Uleson would end up serving 6 months in jail for the videotaping and apologized to the victim. But before he was sentenced, Uleson gave authorities 3 DNA samples, hoping it would prove his innocence in the prostitute's death case. Quote, "The very first time I met this guy at the jail, he offered to take a lie detector test and give a DNA sample," said his lawyer, James Leonard Jr. "I thought, either this guy is the dumbest serial killer in history, or he's totally innocent. I have no doubt it's the latter." End quote. Atlantic County Prosecutor Ted Halsell will tell the Associated Press that the DNA evidence can degrade to the point of being unusable after being in the water for a prolonged period. The victims had all been in the water for several days or more before being discovered. Halsell said in a statement that his office is still actively pursuing the case and has recently assigned more investigators to look into the killings. He would not answer specific questions about Ulesson or any other aspect of the case. This would all take place in 2007 to 2008. Authorities would find another lead in the case with Eldred Raymond Burchell when self-described sex worker Denise Hill identified him as the killer. It's alleged Eldred Raymond Burchell had given himself the nickname of, quote, the Riverman, end quote, a possible reference to the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. Hill told FoxNews.com that Burchell, a drifter, spent time with her in Atlantic City around the time of the murders and confessed to killing people. However, authorities could make no connections in the case. Burchell, whose whereabouts were unknown, could not be reached by FoxNews.com for comment at the time. The FoxNews.com article was published in 2013. With 2 swings and misses, authorities were finding complications in their investigation. To get clarification of the case, a timeline would be established. So let's rewind a bit as we take a deeper look at the story. Police in the Atlantic City suburb of Egg Harbor Township were alerted on November 20th, 2006, to a tragic discovery. Spaced out along the drainage ditch were 4 dead women. At the time, John DeAngelis was a captain on the force. When police examined the first body, they immediately noticed something strange. DeAngelis would explain, quote, they had discovered that the victim did not have shoes on and was barefoot. All facing east, all with no shoes on, no purse, no cell phone, no personal belongings, DeAngelis describes. It appears that these women were killed just for the sake of being killed, end quote. DeAngelis also believed that, most likely, one killer was involved with all 4 victims. Suspicions and fear of a serial killer on the loose shook Atlantic City and the entire Northeast. Police had a high-profile case on their hands with few clues. As they began to identify the victims, the case only grew more difficult. All 4 murdered women had friends and families who loved and supported them. So why and how did they end up in a place like this? Unfortunately, Barbara Brader's sisters, Francine and Valerie, felt little to no surprise when they learned that she was one of the victims. Barbara had been missing for weeks. Still, Francine and Valerie prefer to remember their sister in happier days. When they grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, spending summers with Barbara on the Jersey Shore. Barbara was raised in a very stable, loving home, Valerie remembers. But Barbara had trouble coming to terms with the sudden death of her father. The death, says Valerie, completely devastated the family and left Barbara depressed. After a tough year at Penn State University, Barbara left school and returned to South Jersey Shore, where she held several steady jobs, and in 1997 achieved a lifelong goal: motherhood. Barbara Brader was 42 years old at the time of her death. Her daughter Dominique, only 9. Atlantic City prosecutor Jeffrey Blitz would be tasked with solving Barbara's murder. He formed a special task force to crack the case. Even before Blitz identified Barbara Brader, he revealed the name of the first woman found in the ditch: 35-year-old Kim Raffo. Kim's cousin Juliet remembers the 2 of them growing up on the streets of Brooklyn. Always smiling, always happy, Juliet recalls. As Kim grew into a young adult, she seemed to be headed in the right direction. She really had it together. I was so proud of her, Juliet says. Hugh Ostlander fell in love with Kim and married her in 1998. The young couple moved to Florida and had 2 children. Hugh worked a good construction job while Kim devoted herself to the kids. Everything was about as good as it gets, Hugh remembers. However, things weren't exactly perfect between the two. Things began to fall apart. Kim fell in love with another man, a chef she'd met at a cooking class, and by 2003, the marriage was over. Kim eventually moved to Atlantic City with her lover. 3 years after they arrived in town, Kim Raffo was dead. Kim was strangled to death. The second victim identified died similarly. That victim being 23-year-old Tracy Ann Roberts, who, according to DeAngelis, came from a small town in Delaware and trained to be a medical assistant. Tracy had only moved to Atlantic City within the past year. Everybody that knew her said that she was a really nice, pretty young person that had her whole future ahead of her, DeAngelis says. 6 days after the bodies were found, Barbara Brader was identified through dental records. Identifying the fourth victim proved difficult. She had been in that ditch for more than a month. To determine who she was, Jeffrey Blitz's office released images of her tattoos. There was a tattoo of a bulldog, an English bulldog, and all the family members recognized it immediately, explains the victim's uncle, Steve Taylor. The woman's name was Molly Diltz. She was just 20 years old. Her uncles Steve and Sam Taylor struggled to cope with the loss. She was a warm and loving, caring kid, Steve recalls. She had a lot of good to spread to the world, and it's just a shame that she won't be able to do that. Molly had endured her fair share of hardship, losing both her mother and her brother when she was just a teenager. Her uncle Steve says that was the start of her rebellious side. Molly had some minor run-ins with the law, but after she gave birth to her son Jeremiah, she seemed to be getting her act together. Still, in the summer of 2006, Molly left Jeremiah in the care of her family and left Black Lick, Pennsylvania, behind her. She was just going out there to pursue a better life, Steve says. In the first week of October, Molly contacted her family, calling collect from a New Jersey number. Steve says the call was traced to a payphone in downtown Atlantic City. That would be the last time they ever heard her voice. For decades, Atlantic City was an iconic American vacation land, a place where people try and escape their troubles. Kim, Barbara, Tracy, and Molly were no exception. These are 4 people who came to Atlantic City to remake themselves, explains historian Professor Bryant Simon, something that fantasy cities promise all the time. Kim Raffo took a chance on the alluring Atlantic City, moving there in 2003 with her new love, Kenny Bilecki. Things were really good when we got up here. We were making money and we were trying to build a life, Kenny remembers. Kim and Kenny, a trained chef, both held steady jobs at a restaurant in the Taj Mahal Casino. Kim also became close friends with a local bartender, John Pesci. When I first met her, she had an apartment and a job, and she was just a regular person like everybody else, Pesci explains. Although it didn't take long for Kim to learn that the life in Atlantic City changes the second you walk out of the casino doors. The wealth generated by the casinos has created a boom outside the city, leaving the core of the city with the least fortunate, Professor Simon explains. In this town of ups and downs, Kim Raffo struggled to make ends meet. Every time we would leave our building, we would be approached by drug dealers and to buy drugs, Kenny recalls. Kenny says that eventually they both caught up in the scene. We started drinking and fell into the crack scene, and started smoking it, he admits. Kim had left her kids with Hugh. John Pesci says that deep regret drove her to Tregabees. She was in pain mentally, emotionally. It was important to her to take care of her kids, and when she didn't, it really upset her, he says. Kim had used drugs socially before, but now she was a full-blown addict. Asked how crazy things got, Kenny tells Dow, quote, "Absolutely crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. Mentally. I mean, just losing it." End quote. Unable to hold their jobs, Kenny launched a new career as a shoplifter while Kim started turning tricks on the track to support her habit. Running a cafe on Tennessee Avenue, Papa Joe Buccino is said to know all the local prostitutes. But he says Kim was different. You would think she would be the last person that would be on crack, he explains. Kim was too clean-cut. Kim's murder hit Kenny hard. I got a lot of guilt because she's dead, and I should have watched her a little better, he says. During an interview with 48 Hours, Kenny allowed himself to be videotaped smoking crack. I loved her with all my heart. I'm dying a slow death right here, he admits. Like Kim, Barbara Brader also worked at the casinos. She was a cocktail waitress. However, her sisters say that she got trapped in an abusive relationship with Dominique's father. Asked how she ended up on the streets, Val tells Dow, quote, she was a victim of domestic violence, end quote. She ended up medicating herself with drugs, Francine adds. Barbara would spend years in and out of rehab programs for heroin addiction, but the situation never improved, especially for Dominique. None of my parents watched over me. I was left all alone to do nothing, Dominique says. My dad locked me out of the house. I called the police because he was trying to beat up my mother. He ripped her hand open, right there, she adds, pointing to the palm of her left hand. Her father ended up in prison. Dominique was taken away from her mother and briefly put into foster care. Alone at Atlantic City, Barbara sank into the spiral that many do when dreams shatter around them. Tracy Roberts, herself a young mother, had developed a bad drug habit back in Delaware. Tracy gave me the impression that she was a street girl, explains Papa Joe Buccino. Friends in Atlantic City say Tracy worked for a local strip joint and was then out on the track with the other working girls. 22-year-old Kristen was a 5-year veteran of the Atlantic City streets, her daily struggle mirroring what Tracy and the other victims were living through shortly before they were killed. Driven by a $200 a day heroin habit, Kristen is constantly working, soliciting Johns on the track or in the casino. You walk through the casino, like say you play a slot machine or something. Somebody's going to say something to you, she explains. The streets make anyone tough, but Kristen's pain is never far from the surface. You just miss everything. I have a little sister. I miss her growing up, you know. It's hard. I can't get out of this damn place, though, she explains. Like Kristen, Kim, Barbara, and Tracy were deep into street life. I have to support my drug habit, killer or no killer, Kristen admits. Kristen is still out there, and so is the killer. As investigators learn more about the troubled lives of Kim, Barbara, Tracy, and Molly, a picture of their final days during the fall of 2006 began to emerge. The timeline, simply heartbreaking. On September 9th, while Kim Raffo's boyfriend Kenny was in jail for shoplifting, her ex-husband Hugh Oslander arrived in Atlantic City. Hugh's goal? To find and maybe rescue the mother of his children. Asked what steps he took to get her out of her troubles, Hugh tells Dow, quote, well, quite simply, I just came up there and I said, look, here's your opportunity. I'm more than happy to help you out of here and get you reestablished to being a normal person, end quote. Kim would say yes, and just before she left, she recorded a message for her friend, bartender John Pesci. Hi John, it's Kim. I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. I would really like to say goodbye. Thanks for everything, and I love you, she said in the recording. Kim spends the next several weeks clean and sober with Hugh in Long Island. Meanwhile, back in Atlantic City, women started to disappear. On October 7th, 20-year-old Molly Diltz called her family and then vanished. Molly's uncle, Sam Taylor, clarifies that she had no prostitution arrests, but several people on the street, including Papa Joe, say she'd fallen into the life. Asked to talk about Molly, Papa Joe tells Dow, quote, "Molly, a new kid on the block. She got here in the summertime. She was here for about 4 or 5 different times with some of the girls." End quote. On October 17th, Barbara Brader left the house in nearby Ventura where she was living with a friend. After never returning, her sisters Francine and Valerie eventually tried to file a missing persons report. They say they got the runaround, especially after police discovered a past prostitution arrest. Valerie feels it would have made a difference had police taken it seriously. Quote, "Had it been put out in the newspaper, it could have scared the killer away. I believe that there was enough time to maybe save the last 2 victims." End quote. Sometime in mid-November, a street hustler named Dante said he went clothes shopping with Tracy Roberts. That day, she bought the outfit she was wearing when her body was found. She said, "I'll be back in it like an hour," Dante remembers. She never came back. As the days passed, Kristen started to worry. "It's not like her, so we knew something was wrong," she recalls. During this time, Kim Raffo, unaware of what was happening, made a tragic decision to leave Hugh and return to Atlantic City for good. Kim stayed for a while with John Pesci, but quickly found herself back on the track. Papa Joe may have been the last person to see her, early in the morning on Sunday, November 19th. He says he saw Kim get into a car. "I literally threw her out of here after I fed her and opened the car door. And she said hi to a guy, whatever, and he said hello, and then they left," he recalls. Sources told 48 Hours that Raffo went with a John to the Taj Mahal, but then left him around 5 a.m. to score drugs. The very next day, Kim and the other women were found, barefoot and facing east in the drainage ditch. That scenario fits the toxicology reports, which revealed large amounts of cocaine in Kim and Tracy's bodies, alcohol and Molly, and a potentially lethal dose of heroin in Barbara. That raised the theory that the killer sedated his victims with drugs or alcohol. Not wanting to tip the killer, Atlantic County Prosecutor Jeff Blitz remained tight-lipped, but retired Atlantic City Police Captain Jim Hutchins thought the prosecutor should do something. Hutchins says his former squad, the Atlantic City Vice Cops, who actually knew the streets and the girls, were not brought into the investigation until precious time had been lost. He says he was contacted 3 days after the bodies were found. "I would have gave them whoever they asked for to help knock on doors, to interview witnesses, neighbors, the neighborhood where the girls live, and I wasn't asked to do that," he explained. Hutchins says that may be why, to this day, investigators still don't know if the murders occurred right where the bodies were found, or another location, such as a hotel room or a car. Retired Egg Harbor Township Police Captain John DeAngelis points out another problem. There was no apparent motive. On top of all that, an FBI source told 48 Hours that the scene at the ditch was contaminated by some of the first responders, limiting the amount of forensic evidence that could be retrieved. Decomposition occurred, which made it very difficult for investigators to take fingerprints or any other kind of forensic evidence, DeAngelis explained. The prosecutors denied Hutchins' claims and has stated that crucial evidence was recovered from the victims' clothes and bodies. Still, there has been little to no signs of progress. Some in law enforcement started paying attention to a profiler named John Kelly, who believed that the killer was local to the area. Kelly, a psychotherapist, runs Stock Incorporated, an organization of former cops and mental health professionals. They created a profile on their own to help the investigation. Certain aspects of the profile are rather exotic. Kelly thinks the killer may be into photography or another visual art. In watching many of these serial killers, what we've seen is his underlying artistic nature, he explained. Other elements are more predictable. For instance, the profile describes the killer as a social misfit and a patron of prostitutes. The stroll areas are his hunting grounds, and drug-addicted prostitutes are his prey, Kelly theorized. Pursuing the theory that the killer knew the area well, police took an interest in an ex-con named Billy Scholl. Dante, the street hustler, and his buddy Smiley say they hooked Scholl up with drugs and hookers, including Kim Raffo and Tracy Roberts. So he would have these binges with these women for days, Dow asks. Yeah, days, one man replied. Scholl was questioned by police, but never arrested. He denied 48 Hours' repeated requests for interviews. Asked what kind of a person committed these crimes, criminal profiler John Kelly said, quote, "A man on a mission, and his mission is to eliminate prostitutes." End quote. Could the killer be on a religious mission? Kelly thinks the strange fact that all of the victims were turned toward the east could be a sign of reverence for the Holy Lands of Jerusalem or Mecca. Whatever the demented message that he's sending has something to do with the east, Kelly explained. That's how a Muslim man named Charles Coles, a convicted drug dealer and a friend of Kim Raffo, says he also wound up being questioned and released. Whatever the killer's religion, Kelly felt strongly that he had left a more important clue, one that could be the key to the case. All the victims were found barefoot. He's taken their shoes and he's taken their socks. I have to believe we're looking at a serial killer with a foot fetish here, Kelly says. The foot fetish theory reportedly led police in 48 Hours to an ex-con named Mark Hess, who is now an aspiring minister. At the time of the murders, Hess was living at a flop house on the track, the Fox Manor Hotel. He once offered a woman there a foot massage. Do you think you became a suspect because they heard about you massaging someone's feet? Dow asked Hess. Yeah, he replied. Quote, I admire women that take care of their bodies. I mean, you know, and when I see a woman in sandals, and her toes are all painted up, and her feet are taken care of, I will compliment her. End quote. During his stay at the Fox Manor, Hess crossed paths with both Kim Raffo and Barbara Brader. He remembers trying, unsuccessfully, to get Kim to give up prostitution. And that's what bothers me the most. These people that are not ready to come to the Lord and walk away. A lot of them end up dead, he told Dow. Asked if he killed those 4 women, Hess said, quote, No, I didn't. I can't kill anybody. I never have. I never will. End quote. Hess is apparently not the only man in town that had a thing for feet. Denise Hill, an experienced prostitute, told police she had a close personal encounter with a foot freak at a Best Western the same week the bodies were discovered. He was talking about my shoes. He liked my shoes. But at this time, I didn't know anything about the murders. But he was so obsessed with my shoes, she recalled. Denise says she even gave the John a pair of her shoes. I got him the shoes. They were just like this color. Same color, she said. But then the date went from strange to terrifying. He was talking about some crazy stuff. He was talking about like really bizarre stuff, like he killed some people, she explained. If Denise had seen the killer, what did he look like? To find out, 48 Hours hired criminal image profiler Gene Boylan, who frequently works with the FBI. Boylan is the artist behind thousands of favorite sketches, most notably the Unabomber. Denise told Gene she spent several hours with the man, and though he was wearing glasses and a hat the entire time, she claims his face is seared in her mind. Getting that image on paper took all day, but by nightfall, the sketch revealed what had been locked in Denise's memory for months. Looking at the sketch, Denise was convinced it was the same man she had spent time with in the hotel. 48 Hours sent the sketch to investigators, but Prosecutor Blitz would not comment on Denise's story. Despite the investigators' disinterest with the story and sketch, it would catch the eye of Barbara Brader's daughter, Dominique. She thinks the man may have come by her parents' house years ago. Well, when I was in the middle of playing with my mom, she opened the door. He tried to sell her something. I've just seen him, and I'm pretty sure it is him, she explained. Still, as the months and now years roll on, none of these leads have panned out. Schul, Coles, and Hess were never charged with the murders, and some of the victims' families can do nothing but grow frustrated. The identity of the man in the sketch still remains a mystery. For the time being, there will be no Hollywood endings or cliches about closure for the families of the victims. Precious memories and heartfelt tears are all there is to show. Dominique is holding up well, considering. Barbara Brader's sister Valerie says, like Barbara, Tracy, Molly, and Kim sadly all left young children behind. Still, there is one ray of hope. Valerie and her husband have adopted Dominique and are raising her with their 2 sons in Florida. Dominique's home life is stable. She's getting counseling, and she's performing superbly in school. I plan to go to college, all the way up to college, and stay in college for 10 years, she says, laughing. Dominique's future is very bright, Valerie says. This isn't the end for her, at all. These updates are from the 2007 CBS article covering the murders. Bringing us closer to the present day, there was a slight update in 2023. In July, homicide detectives arrested and charged former New York architect Rex Heuermann with 4 of the Gilligo Beach murders after linking him to the victims through DNA evidence. However, New York law enforcement authorities and Reynolds, the Atlantic County prosecutor, could never link Heuermann to the Eastbound Strangler case. In a media statement over the summer, Reynolds said investigators from Atlantic City met with their New York counterparts to, quote, compare timelines, dates, methodologies, etc. of both cases, and there does not seem to be a connection, end quote. All the initial suspects have been ruled out, Kelly says. We believe it had to be someone who knew Atlantic City. The Gilligo Beach killer would have needed to travel more than 150 miles from Long Island to Atlantic City. Phelps believes the Eastbound Strangler case is solvable if police officials would go back and conduct new interviews with the sex workers he met after the 4 victims were discovered. He says, he theorizes the suspect may be someone who is trafficking the victims. What you have is a group of women murdered because their killer no longer has any use for them. Phelps speculates. Who would that be? The person who oversees them. Generally speaking, that is the most logical answer. Now, present day 2024, the Eastbound Strangler case remains cold. For nearly 2 decades, police probes into a small list of persons of interest have done nothing but fizzled out. Investigators have not received any concrete leads, despite Stalk offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and prosecution of the killer. Anyone with information about this case or any other serious crimes is asked to call the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office at 609-909-7800 or Crime Stoppers at 609-652-1234 or 1-800-658-8477. Tips. And now we'd like to take a moment of pause to show respect to the victims mentioned during today's episode. Rest in peace, Barbara V. Brader. Molly Jean Diltz. Tracy Ann Roberts. Kim Raffo. Thank you for watching. This has been Ronelle Pearson with NJ Crime Talk. Take care.